Hello everyone, this class is all about experiments. I'm gonna go over different types of experiments and test marketing, the functions of experiments, conditions for inferring causality, different experimental designs, and then different threats to validity. But first, I'm gonna start off with a video showing you how close an experiment can be to a prank.
The experiment making headlines by the chain Payless Shoes. They held a grand opening of a luxury store with a different name but the same shoes, and charged hundreds more for those same shoes. Customers paid. Here's ABC's Kana Whitworth.
Behold, Palessi.
We built a fake luxury store in Los Angeles and filled it with Payless shoes. The guests at our grand opening party had no idea.
Guests invited to check out what looked like a luxury shoe shop.
They're elegant, sophisticated.
I just think it's so classy.
And I could tell it was made with high quality material.
A $35 shoe going for $645, an 1,800% markup. Store owners sat on their heels as fashion influencers emptied their wallets.
I would pay 400, 500. Yeah, people are gonna be like, where'd you get those? Those are amazing.
Then they're let in on the prank.
These are actually from Payless.
You've got to be kidding me.
Shut up. Are you serious?
But those shoppers were refunded their money and they got to keep the shoes.
David Payless calling it a provocative social experiment designed to challenge today's image-conscious culture. Either way, it was an effective PR stunt.
Yeah.
David?
Clearly a marketing ploy, but they paid. Kana, thank you.
So this prank really shows that experiments can be fun and can be very versatile. So there's, for example, advertising experiments where you can present people with two different versions of an ad. One, in this case here, having no disclaimer, and the other one having the disclaimer, the girl in this photo has been retouched. So you could wonder which of those two ads, think of A/B testing, will generate the most positive self-image or appearance satisfaction in young women. You could do a pricing experiment where you set the price lower or higher and see how that influences profitability of certain products. You can do a sales productivity experiment where you increase the average number of sales calls per person or per customer and see if that actually significantly improves sales. Or this Instagram hashtag experiment, which is really fun too, was actually done by students a few years ago. Will the use of many versus few hashtags increase the number of likes and post engagement on Instagram? So here you see two pretty much identical pictures where one of them has only one hashtag, hashtag Serenity, the other one has several hashtags, and see how the use of hashtags really influences post engagement, likes, and so on. If you want to read more about this particular experiments, you can take a look right here in the link. You will also notice that the locations here are different, Maui, Hawaii versus Koh Samui. This could be a potential confound, so remember the word confound because we're going to talk about that later in this video as well. You could also do a field experiment, and a field experiment is slightly different in the sense that you conduct the experiment in a natural setting. A fun example of a field experiment is researchers in France that found that musical practice is apparently associated with sexual selection because what they did was in an actual street, a shopping street in a city, they had a young guy either holding a guitar or holding a sports bag and then asking the number of several women, and turns out that when he was carrying the guitar instead of the sports bag over his shoulder, he was actually more successful getting numbers from these women. So women were more willing to give him their number when he was presented as a musician rather than a sports bro. Another really interesting experiment was conducted by researchers in the 90s on how to make strangers fall in love. So what they did was they put two random strangers together and they had them read questions from a questionnaire that were increasingly more personal, these questions. So of course these questions were pre-tested and handpicked by the researchers, but turned out that by asking the right intimate questions, you can actually make people fall in love with you. So pretty interesting trick right here. If you want to read more about this study, make sure to click the link in the note pages. So there's two major types of experiments. There's lab experiments and field experiments. Lab experiments manipulate an independent variable in a contrived, controlled experimental setting. By consequence, you have stronger control over extraneous variables. Usually this results in stronger internal validity, which is a concept we will talk about later on as well. On the other hand, field experiments manipulate an independent variable in a natural setting. So they try to study a certain effect in its naturally occurring environment. So by consequence, it's kind of hard to control for extraneous variables, but you still try to control for them as much as possible. And usually field experiments result in stronger external validity. Now, we will talk much more about internal and external validity in the coming minutes. First, I want to talk a little bit more about test marketing, which is called the ultimate field experiment.
We conducted an experiment to evaluate how well Whopper fans know their beloved Whopper. The people you will see here are real people, and these are their real reactions.
I've probably eaten about 2 Whoppers a week for the last 20 years. I love Whoppers. I've turned Burger King into a crime scene a time or two.
I absolutely love beef. Beef all the way.
If it's not beef, I don't want it. First bite, I would know the difference between beef and whatever else you have.
Little do they know, their Whopper patty was actually made from plants.
You're f***ing kidding me.
We're not, Grant.
Wait, plant-based? What are you talking about?
No animals, just plants.
Really?
This is a f***ing cow.
No f***ing cow.
Tastes like a Whopper.
Tastes like Whopper.
Tastes like a beef burger.
It's made of f***ing beef right here. You see that? It's beef.
We swear, it's not beef.
That's impossible. It tasted just like a Whopper should taste.
A
Lies!
patty with 0 milligrams of cholesterol, 17 grams of protein, 100% Whopper, and 0% beef. We know it's impossible to believe. The Impossible Whopper, only at Burger King in St. Louis.
I'm confused. I'm reevaluating my life.
So this experiment, which is of course an ad, showed that when you swap out the regular beef patty in a Whopper by a plant-based patty, a vegan patty by Impossible Foods, a lot of the loyal customers wouldn't even notice. So this is another prank that is actually conducted in the real natural setting. Now, test marketing is all about trying out a new product to see what the product viability is in a natural setting. So to conduct a good test market, there's 2 main criteria. First of all, your test market should be demographically similar to the larger target market you eventually want to launch your product in. This has to do with representativeness of your sample. The second criteria is relative isolation. So ideally, you want to be able to launch your product in that test market at a relatively low cost, so not having any spillover effects, let's say in terms of advertising, so keeping it contrived and confined to that specific geographical area. So if you want to learn more about which US cities are commonly used for test markets, there's again a link right here on the slide. Test marketing is an ultimate way to test a new product. It's a really good way to test the viability of a product. It's also a pretty accurate method for forecasting future sales in the larger target market. And it's a great way to pre-test marketing mix variables in a very specific way. How exactly do you want to set the price? How exactly do you want the packaging to be? And so on in the test market before you launch in a larger area. The downside is that, as with any market research, the results are not infallible. So you can't 100% trust that whatever is happening in that test market will also be found in a larger market. It's also costly and time consuming. And then another tricky issue is that with test markets, when they're positive, this leads usually to positive press coverage, positive pre-market publicity, which in itself can bias the reception of that product in the larger area because only positive news gets spilled. Usually if a test market fails, if it turns out the product is not successful in that test market, then no one ever talks about it anymore. So you have that positive market publicity that could bias the actual launch of the product in the larger market later. There's different types of test marketing. I'm going to tell you the basics about each. For example, there's sales wave research, and sales wave research is a very good way to test your product's competitive advantage against other products. So with sales wave research, initially a set of consumers tries a product at no cost. Then they get re-offered that product along with competitors' products up to 3 to 5 times. These are called sales waves. The company then notes how many times the customers selected the product again and what their reported level of satisfaction was. Another example of test marketing is simulated test marketing. And with simulated test marketing, the process emulates a real purchasing process. The first step is recruiting a panel of consumers willing to participate in the simulated test market. They get checked on their background, habits, practices, and so on. What do they buy? How often do they buy certain things, and so on? All these questions, of course, pertaining to the product that is being tested in this test market. Then these people get exposed to a real ad in a competitive context. What I mean by that is that they get shown an advertisement for the product you're testing, but also ads of competing brands, competing products. Then we move on to simulated store purchase, where these customers get brought into a simulated retail environment and get to shop around. Then, of course, as a researcher, you note how many people end up picking your product off the shelf rather than competitors' products. There's, of course, post-purchase inquiry, where you ask questions about why they picked up your product, if it was related to the fact that they saw an ad about it, and so on. And then the respondents take the product home, get to use it, and then there's a post-usage evaluation. So this is a very lengthy process, pretty expensive as well, but it gives fairly accurate results to show advertising effectiveness. It also can be used as a forecasting model to project future sales. Controlled test marketing is a third type of test marketing that is basically summed up as dollars for shelf space. A specific panel of stores carries a new product, and in these stores, in this retail environment, there's a very controlled shelf position, so really good visible shelf position, which of course you pay top dollar for. The sales are measured at the checkout, and then later consumers are asked an evaluation of the product that they bought. Now, the downside of this is, since this is happening in a real retail setting, it exposes the product to competitor scrutiny, so it's already out there in the market. Another type of test marketing is electronic test marketing, which is often used in conjunction with the previous methods. With electronic test marketing, again, a panel of consumers uses electronic identification cards to allow a company to keep track of all the things they buy. This is all scanner-based data. Next, a regional launch is what we mostly think of when we think of test markets. It is one confined geographical area, usually one or a few cities or a small region, that is ideally representative of your larger target market, let's say, before you do a national launch. You make sure there's good shelf exposure, you do a full promotional campaign in this area with final packaging, right price setting, and so on. So basically you test the product already completely as is, but just the only restriction is the geographical area. And this makes the financial risk lower, because instead of doing this full-blown promotional campaign in a larger area, you only confine it to that specific regional launch. A commonly used city is Columbus, Ohio, for a lot of these regional launches. And then lastly, there's alpha and beta testing. Alpha and beta testing is very useful with new technologies. The difference between the two is that with alpha testing, you test within the company, whereas with beta testing, you test with real consumers. So, in other words, you could say that alpha testing is a type of technical acceptance testing, a very early way to detect bugs and errors or defects in, for example, software before you release it to users. Beta testing, on the other hand, is already done among real users. It's the next stage. Once it passes alpha testing, it can move on to a type of external user acceptance testing, where a select group of users can give feedback on user friendliness, uses, and functionality of a product.